Today we are looking at the second place BCS Rosemont 2022 Narukami deck profile. Before I get into it, I actually want to do just a few shoutouts first because, you know, when people would put shoutouts at the end, you guys never actually listen or hear them, and I feel like these people deserve credit, so let's start with those. First of all, Sage from MCC. This guy is the one who thought up of this deck's main concept, which is Eradicator featuring Armor Break Dragon. And I'll explain why that matters and why that's important in a little bit, but this was all his idea. Thanks, Sage, for doing Narukami theory crafting with me. I wouldn't have been able to build this deck without you. It's my baby, but you helped make it, so good job, bro. Next, I want to shout out all the people in Outer Orange's Discord, the Peels. You got people like Shen and Nigman, you got Charlie Scott, you got a lot of people who wanted to help me out test. You guys, and another shout out I'm going to call out, not only did you guys help me test for this event, but your constant cheering in the Discord, as I told you guys I was making it to the top tables, that helped me to keep going. You guys literally are like the reason I topped. I wouldn't have been able to do it without y'all cheering me on, so once again, thank you guys for cheering me on. Next is Michael from Team Best Girl. This guy gave me a lot, of last minute testing. The night before, I played into his extender Ripple list, which is better than most of the Ripple lists I ended up fighting on the actual event. And he just kicked my butt for like hours on hours on hours on hours, putting me in the worst possible situations. And without his help, I really would not have been able to make it. I knew exactly what to do at exactly the right time because of him. So, Michael, if you're watching, shout outs to you, buddy. Everyone make sure to go subscribe to Team Best Girl. It's his channel. He's the one who helped make this happen. Next, I want to give a shout out to Saya, OT Saya on Discord. He's the reason I have my cards. I ordered the clan selection cards, and I wasn't sure if I was going to get them on time, so he told me to get cards from him instead, and they came to me 3 days after I bought them from him. It's because of him. I was able to get these cards early, and I was able to test them early. So, Saya, you're the best, man. Without you, I wouldn't have been able to play this deck. And really, shoutouts to all my opponents as well. They were all such lovely people to play against. I didn't get all your names, unfortunately, but I did end up friending a lot of you on Facebook, so if you're watching this, this is a shout out for you. Please comment down below, or, you know, comment on whatever Facebook post I end up posting. Let's hang out, let's talk, let's chill, let's discuss some more theory, because I want to go to Worlds, bro. I want to go to Worlds, and I want to win, so I need some really strong opponents to test against, so this is a call out to all my opponents from BCS Rosemont. Let's get that run back, huh? Alright, now on to the actual deck profile, but first I have to answer a very, very important question. Why Narukami? In a field flooded with MFD and Ripple, why did I choose to bring Narukami? Well, there's a few reasons for this. First of all, I did not want to play Ripple. It's not a deck that I'm familiar with, and it's not a deck I really wanted to learn. I'm sure I could play a deck like Narukami, given that I know this clan inside and out. I could play this for hours, and even if I'm like up against a bad matchup, I can still do relatively fine. But like if I was playing Ripple and I was thrown into a matchup I had no idea what to do against, I'd probably lose immediately. Mainly because Ripple, as much as we like to crap on it, really does actually require brain power to keep going for 20 minutes and not misplay. Even if you do misplay, you can still make it work, but that's a lot to ask out of a Ripple player, especially if you're going into an event with 7 or 8 rounds. Playing Ripple for that long amount of time gets exhausting, and I really didn't want to risk getting burnt out by the end of it. So I wanted to play a little easier, a bit of an easier deck to play in this kind of format. So I decided to bring Narukami. This is a clan I know inside and out. This is a clan that I know has pretty good matchups against MFD and a little bit against Ripple. I know that Exterminate plus Sweep Command was broken. I know that the main deck for Narukami has a really strong grade 2 game. I know it basically every other fair deck in the game, but I really needed something to help equalize against Ripple, and there was one card, this guy right here, one card in Narukami, which I knew would be able to help me equalize against Ripple very easily. We'll discuss that more when we get to the actual deck profile. But Narukami, at the time, I didn't believe is the best deck in format, but now I can 100% with certainty say it's the best deck in format by a country mile. Its matchups against Ripple and MFD are just too favorable. I did not lose to a single player in Swiss, and I only lost in the finals because of 2 reasons that I'll get to when I actually talk about my tournament report. But first, I want to talk about the actual deck itself. We're going to start off with grade 3s. First of all, we have 4 copies of Sweep Command Dragon. This is the deck's main boss monster. Surprisingly, I'm not actually playing Armor Break as the main boss monster, but there's a few reasons for this. Sweep Command is, in my opinion, the best Narukami card to come out of the clan selection. Not Voing like most people would tell you, but this card, and there's a few reasons for that. In this format, Stunverse is kind of bad, given that it's a card that needs to do 2 Stunverse activations in order to actually be any form of lethal. Unfortunately, we're in a format that if you're activating Stunverse 2 times, you're probably either against a bad player or dead, since the format is just way too fast. If you're Stunversing on an opponent's Ripple board after they've gone off, that means they've gotten 1 turn to set up for their next turn, in which case they will kill you without question. And against MFD, usually the first Stunverse is all you need to really get yourself back in the game. So Voing, I felt like was a bit of a bait card. It's really good with Stunverse, but unfortunately, I didn't see myself Stunversing much this event, and I really didn't, except for one exception that I'll explain when we get to the next grade 3 in the deck. The stride that I thought was more broken was Exterminate, and Sweep Command by himself just sets up the entire Exterminate turn just by riding him. On ride, you can Soul Blast 1 in order to bind an opponent's front row rear guard, and then take a back row and put it in the front row. You don't have to do that second bit, I only did it every now and then, but the second skill is what matters. When a rear guard is bound, this includes by his own skill, you can bind another rear guard in the front row, and then there's some other effect that we'll elaborate a little more later, but just those 2 effects alone, those set up an Exterminate turn for 20k and drawing 2 cards by itself. It's for this reason that I think Sweep Command is the reason you can't actually ban Stunverse if you want to fix this deck. You have to ban Exterminate, because if you ban Stunverse, the deck just becomes Sweep Command into Exterminate over and over and over and over and over again. And that alone is really unfair, but if I wasn't winning with the next card in the deck, which I'll talk about in a bit, I was winning with Sweep Command. Now, the other bits of the skill, the second one, if you have 4 or more damage when you activate the second one to bind another rear guard, you can Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1 to make it excel, which will draw you a card, and then call another Eradicator from the drop zone. So if you're at 4 or more damage, which by the end of a Ripple turn you should be, you can make an additional attack, and that can actually matter when your opponent's sitting at 1 or 2 damage and you need to really start equalizing or finishing the game off. This effect came up, I want to say, 40% of the games that I rode Sweep Command in, but it really wasn't that much, but it is there and it does work when you resolve it. In the event that your opponent only has 1 open front row rear guard and then their back row has like an Odysseus or something, you can ride Sweep Command, bind the front row, or even if there's no front row, you don't have to bind anything, and then scoot the Odysseus to the front row and swing into it so that you can attack and get your Twin Drive without giving the Ripple player much more damage. So that effect is also pretty versatile. Sweep Command just does everything the deck wants to do, and Voing's Sword is strong, don't get me wrong. But I genuinely just think that this card is better because of the interactions it has with Exterminate and the current meta right now. Next, we have the man himself, Armor Break Dragon. 3 copies. So, for those of you who don't know what this card does, which might actually be a lot of you given that none of my opponents knew what this card did when I played, you can Counterblast 3 to bind all of your opponent's front row units. Now that alone is kind of garbage and overcosted, but it gets plus 10k and 2 critical, not 1, 2 critical for every open front row rearguard circle your opponent has. If your opponent's playing Ripple and they go off, this can easily hit. I believe the highest I hit on Saturday was 14 critical. That's absolutely insane. Let me set the stage for you here. Ripple are dominating the meta, and MFD is a deck that when it goes off, it wins, and sometimes it just bricks and dies, so the only real matchup you need to worry about is Ripple. Against Ripple, this card, if your opponent's not aware of its existence, which none of my opponents were, this card alone is a one-hit kill. This is the equalizer that Narukami needs in order to deal with the current metagame of Ripple, and sometimes even the mirror match, because I did fight a mirror match, and this is the reason I won my mirror match. Both times I fought him, 1 in Swiss and 1 in top 8. The second skill is, again, like Sweep Command, a limit break, but this one's a lot more impactful. When it attacks, if you have 4 or more damage, this gets plus 10k, and your opponent cannot call Sentinels from their hand to the Guardian Circle during the battle that this guy attacks. This means you cannot PG it. You cannot PG this card unless you're using a G-Guardian that has a PG ability, but I did look at every single G-Guard that could stop this attack, and none of those G-Guards are in clans that I would be resolving this effect against anyway. Grand Blue, you would never use this. And Gold Paladin, Gurguit specifically, you'd never use this because Gurgit's effect could stop it anyway. None of the decks that have those kind of G-guards are effects that you are clans that you want to armor break against anyway. Armor break came up in the following games for me. In round 2, I fought MFD and he had no hand and 1 damage. I couldn't exactly make the biggest board ever, and I was worried that if he top deck a grade 3, he would MFD me and I would kind of be out of it. Given that my hand was not the strongest ever, and given that my board was not the strongest either. So I had the ability to go into Armor Break Dragon, use the skill in order to give him 5 critical, and since the opponent had no cards in hand, I used whatever board I had to push him to 3 so that he couldn't like heal out of it or anything. So Armor Break Dragon for game happened in round 2. In round 4, I fought a Ripple player. That's the game where I got this to 14 critical. In round 5, I fought against the Mirror Match. This came up in the mirror match. This went up to, I believe, 9 critical because they had 2 front row excels, and their hand was incredibly small, so I was able to easily break through them and deal all that damage. In top 8, I fought the same mirror match, and I used this effect again on the same amount of board states, so I killed him the same way. In top 4, I fought against Albert from WCC, who was playing Ripple. He was my round 3 opponent. And in that case, he had, I don't remember how many excels, but it was armor break for game. But in the final round, we'll talk about the final round in a little bit. But overall, Armor Break Dragon is the equalizer that this clan needed in order to deal with all of the ripples that are just running around. And even then, it can sometimes help with MFD because it can close out a game against a deck that basically has no hand size. In hindsight, I maybe should have played 2, but I feel like 3 was a good number for the event that I played at. I don't think Armor Break Dragon is necessarily a bad card, even after Ripple meta. You play it as a 2 of as an equalizer in case things go terribly wrong, because your deck has the space and your only grade 3 you really need to run is like Sweep Command. Again, Voing is kind of a bait card. So I feel like Armor Break Dragon at 3, you can go to 2 if you want to, but for this event, I felt like 3 was perfect and it ended up working for me. Worst case scenario is like stride fodder or discard fodder for one of my many searchers. Speaking of many searchers, we have 4 copies of Spark Rays Dragon. This card is, it's Spark Rays Dragon. On place, get plus 5k, then you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck, add an Eradicator, and then if you add a card, discard a card. On hit, Soul Blast 1, you can draw a card. The Vanguard effect to Peep 5 did end up coming in a lot. It helped me grab either Sweep Command, it helped me grab other pieces I needed for the meta, which we'll look at as in the next card. And it basically fixed my hand whenever it was looking too bad. In the late game, it ended up being discard fodder, but the on-hit Soul Blast 1, Draw 1 did come up in my round 1, where I fought against Flagberg Mega Colony, and I wanted a grade 2 game, and this guy's absolutely insane in the grade 2 game. This guy blows out basically any fair deck in the game, so you still want to play 4 copies of Spark Rays. Next up is 4 copies of Unruly Dragon. I don't like this card for a myriad of reasons. I feel like it is meta dependent, and so if I don't have to play it, I don't, but for this meta, this card was basically required. Let's go over some of the things that this card can do. Against MFD, if you call 2 and they have a smoke gear in the front area, there's no way they can get rid of, there's no way they'll be able to keep their smoke gear on the board. If your board looks a little something like Vanguard's right here and your board looks like this, and they have a smoke gear over here, for example, smoke gear will try to swing into one and then you just guard it, and then their other rear guard will swing it and you intercept, killing off the smoke gear. This way, they might not actually be able to stride. My round 2 opponent did anyway, but reducing their chances of striding is genuinely what's going to get you back in the game. Not only that, but if someone doesn't read Unruly Dragon and doesn't know what the card does, which actually did come up quite a bit, this is just a free Denial Griffin before the attack even happens. Against Jaime in my final round, for example, the only reason I had a smidge of a survival chance in the last turn of the game was because I was able to intercept with an Unruly and hit a Pursuit Assault. That is massive. Unfortunately, he did OT me to death, so it is what it is, but, I mean, hey, I got my invite, I ain't too worried. Unruly Dragon is just absolutely insane. This is another tip is, given that he's only 4k less than 12, if the opponent swings into this and you can guard this for the same value that you would have guarded your Vanguard, you can do that, and Unruly will keep soaking up attacks, making your Vanguard incredibly safe from extra blows. Unruly in that case can be considered a 1-card PG that you aren't necessarily allowed to activate. But if you get the board state just right, Unruly could actually be the difference between you surviving and you dying. And the more I talk about it, the more I actually realize that I actually do like this card. I just don't like the idea of playing this card in a matchup where they know what they're doing. But it does limit their plays, and so it did end up working out rather well. So 4 copies of this, absolutely required. But unfortunately, in order to make room for this, I had to cut down other pieces to 3. So I'm going to cover all of my restanders at once. These are the cards that make Exterminate good. Cho-Oh is at 3, mainly because you only really need to see 1, and your deck eats through Counterblast like an MF if you're playing Armor Break. There are times when you'll resolve an Armor Break and then need to resolve an Exterminate later in the game, and when you do that, Cho-Oh is literally useless. Cho-Oh also, the front row bind effect never actually came up. He's literally just a restander. With Verena, same reason, but I wanted to play him at more, but unfortunately he's a grade 4 with no shield value. He's stride fodder as well, but like you still need shield value for this meta. So I ended up only playing 2. The fact that he's Soul Blast and not Counterblast though makes him highly more valuable than Cho-Oh. He's not searchable, so if you do see him, hold on to him because you're probably not going to get a chance to see another one. But Cho-Oh is searchable off Spark Raids, it's searchable off the grade 1. But these are your 5 restanders. 2 restanders, any two combination of these 5 cards plus Exterminate is usually enough to end the game if they have like 1 or 2 damage. Either that, or even if you don't win the game that turn, you still reduce their hand to a measly low amount. So this puts you in a winning position, and it's for that reason that I feel like the restanders are valued very highly. I'd play more, but I needed space for other things, and the Cho-Oh is searchable. So we only have 5 restanders. Next up is 4 copies of Nusku. Nusku is the reason why I was able to mulligan as aggressively and as greedy as I was able to. Because all of your grade 2s are Eradicators, Nusku can grab them, and you don't have to worry about ever bricking in this deck. I never had to G-assist 1 time. If you see a Nusku in your hand or in your opener, you can usually get a little more aggressive with your mulliganing, and I did. Usually if you ride this card, you're set to go. If I didn't draw a grade 2 for turn, this guy got it for me. It's because of this that you can shove away like 4 cards and not get punished for it. I did some really aggressive mulligans. I usually only kept like sweep commands and armor breaks and then like put the rest back if I had this in hand. So Nusku alone is the reason why you can be as greedy as you can. And the risk reward gets a lot more better when you reduce the risk with cards like this. I am only running 3 copies of Demolition Dragon. I know this is going to piss a lot of Narukami players off, but I genuinely don't think that Demolition is that good at 4 right now. Think of it this way. Demolition Dragon going for a grade 2 game right now, or any kind of aggro right now, is garbage. If you attack MFD and give them Counterblast, or you attack Ripple and give them Counterblast, they will hit you back with a force so much harder than anything you could have thrown at them, and you basically just lose the game. Because of that, doing a grade 2 game or a grade 2 rush of any kind with Demolition Dragon being the on-hit draw is not actually that good, but because you do want to be drive checking and getting cards to your hand, you do want to have 1 to put behind your Vanguard. And so when you play 4, you'll probably see 2. And so if you're playing 3, you'll probably see 1. I did end up seeing 1 Demolition Dragon in every game where I wanted to see him. Not only can Nusku and Spark Rays search him, but if you're going second and you ride him, it doesn't feel bad either. The on-hit draw also did help. Like if I was fighting against MFD, for example, to prevent them from doing any kind of Karunta shenanigans, on hit, I would shove it in Soul, and bind a card from the drop and just let them have their win con, because again, if I get on the clapback against MFD, I'm good to go. Demo is better at 3 than at 4, but in hindsight, if you wanted to put in 4, you could remove an armor break, given that 2 is probably fine, and that's because we're also running 4 copies of Mighty Bolt Dragoon. This card is way too good to be played at any less than 4. Not only does it grab you your Mighty Bolts in the matchup where you may need it, not Mighty Bolts, Armor Breaks in the matchups where you might need it, but it also grabs Heal Guardians, and you need to have at least 2 Heal Guardians in your hand in order to survive anything. If you're on grade 2, you need them to give your Vanguard plus 20k, and if you're on grade 3, you need them in order to go Bulwark against MFD or Impede against Ripple. They're absolutely necessary in the deck, and so you need to aggressively use your Mighty Bolts if you don't have your 2 Heal Guardians already. Mighty Bolt also gets +5 if you bound anything, and so if you do an Armor Break turn off Stunverse, you can call this behind the Armor Break to give it plus 13k in the boost. That much actually does matter. If you put this behind Armor Break, the Armor Break goes from say 53 to 65, and that is so much more of a difference. Not only does that clear force numbers, but also it's another 10k that they have to throw down to guard, and so yeah, Mighty Bolt's just kind of really good all across the board. If you're not playing for this format, you're not playing Narukami, you need to have those Heal Guardians and you need to have those Armor Breaks. I will say though, I do believe I lost my last match because I grabbed an Armor Break off of Mighty Bolt and Jaime read the card. Because of this, Jaime knew exactly what I was up to before I even started, so he actually did play around it and I wasn't able to Armor Break him the instant I rode up to 3. It's a little unfortunate, but it is what it is. Mighty Bolt still carried me throughout the day, so we're playing 4 copies of this guy. That's it for our grade 1s. Now going on to grade 0s. Before we get into triggers, we have 2 copies of First Thunder Draco Kid. This card never came up the whole event. I'd love to cut it, but unfortunately, the value it provided in testing against any fair deck ever was just too great. When your opponent's rearguard is retired either by Bulwark or by Impede, you can shove this into Soul of your Vanguards and Eradicator, which it is because you'll probably be on Sweep Command. Look at the top 10 cards of your deck, look for Sweep Command, and then write it. Not only does this give you an additional Excel 2 and you draw another card, but also Sweep Command's on ride effect activates. You Soul Blast 1, you bind a thing. That is an extremely powerful interactive play. And in my testing against MFD, if they attacked into me and I had Bulwark active, I Bulwarked them, then I would go into, I would activate First Thunder's effect, put it in Soul, grab Steve, and then their turn would be basically moot. This card should still be run. It never came up all event. In fact, it actually ended up being discard fodder more than anything, but the value provided in testing against MFD was just too powerful. Moving on to triggers, we have 4 draw PGs. I really didn't end up PGing much the whole event. In fact, I'd actually probably change these to Sentinel crits, but the draw trigger effect did end up coming up as a defensive, and I think draws are really good this format. It's for that reason that I highly recommend keeping these at draws instead of crits. For crits, actually, we're running 3 stride and 4 soul crits. Now, 3 stride crit is because we're already running 9 cards you can discard for stride. Technically 8 since one of them will be on Vanguard Circle. But the 10k that this gives to Armor Break on a Stunverse turn is insane. Think of it this way. Average, your opponent's hand is going to have about 10k shield per card in their hand, given that triggers have more than other cards and some cards have less than other cards. On average, for each card in your opponent's hand, they can throw down 10k shield. Because of that, if you put this in your soul, you're forcing out another card out of their hand. It's because of this that I was able to hit 115k at one point against Ripple in round 4. That's actually the way you count if you can kill them with Armor Break. You count the number of cards in their hand. For each card in their hand, that's a 10k shield, and if you can break that, you win the game. So, soul crits also matter because you need soul for a lot of things. You need soul for Sweep Command, you need soul for Exterminate, you need soul for Stunverse, you need soul for Sweep Command's other effect, you need soul for Spark Rays. Soul's very valuable, and so the soul crits are very powerful. The last trigger we're running is obviously 4 copies of the Heal Guardian. These are your lifeline in this meta. If you can resolve 2 of these against Ripple, then you survive their turn and kill them with Armor Break on the clapback. Either that, or if you can search these off and Impede's one of the most powerful cards in the meta right now, or Bulwark against MFD. Heal Guardians are a lot of people were playing Eradicator, I saw at top tables. I think Eradicator heals are a mistake. You need to be able to grab these off Mighty Bolt, no questions. And of course, the 1 over trigger. This actually never came up the whole event. Over triggers did not decide any games until the last round of the entire event in final round when Jaime OT'd me. So for those of you who are saying that OTs are balanced and that bad players need them in order to get back in the game, notice how I, the good player, won all of my games when no OTs were involved. That's really crazy. I cannot think of a possible explanation as to why that is. Leave down in the comments why you think that's the case. And of course, we have the one starter. It's the wrong starter, but it has Eradicator in the name, so we play it. Moving on to the G-Zone, we have 3 copies of Exterminate. Like I said, this is the best stride in the deck, and this is what you would want to be going into every time you use Sweep Command. This card is absolutely bonkers, and if you're going to ban anything in Narukami, you need to hit this card to either 1 or 0. This card says, on play, Soul Blast 1, draw a card for each empty front row rearguard circle your opponent has. Against Ripple, I've drawn like 5 or 6 cards, but that's not the effect that really matters. You can Counterblast 1 to give your entire front row plus 10k for each open front row circle your opponent has. Even if you're not playing against Ripple, which if you are, that's plus 60 at least, that's still plus 20 to your front row, and a lot of decks just can't deal with that kind of hand. Like I said, if you get 2 Restanders with an Exterminate, that's usually just a game. If not on that turn, then you're so far ahead that there's no way they can possibly counter you. Exterminate is genuinely the best card in the entire clan right now. And it's a little sad because it's kind of boring, but it did end up winning me a lot of my games. If I wasn't armor breaking, I was sweep commanding, and if I was sweep commanding, I was doing this. Every time I resolved Exterminate, I either won or their hand became so small that I won on the following turn with no problem. This card absolutely needs to be played at 3. Next is 2 copies of Stunverse. Now, a lot of people might be wondering why 2, because people are under the impression that Stunverse is the best card in Narukami. First of all, if people say that Stunverse is better than Exterminate, that's how you know they're either A, a bad Narukami player, or B, an idiot. Sometimes both. So, Stunverse is awful in this format for the reasons I've explained. 2 Stunverses is usually when it starts becoming unfair and when it becomes a thing that you want to worry about. Unfortunately, we're in a meta where Ripple Rush will do their thing, and then you'll stride Stunverse, take 2 cards out of their hand, pass, and then they kill you. This kinda, as a result, is only good on armor break turns. What this does is, remember what I said earlier, for each card in their hand, they have 10k shield to guard your attack. If you Stunverse them, not only do you take out a lot of key pieces from the board, which does matter, but you also take out 20k shield from the opposing hand. And if you manage to do it twice for some reason, which was my plan against Jaime, but I never got to do it, you've taken 40k shield out of their hand. So Stunverse is powerful, not necessarily for the fact that he's set up for a later turn, but because he increases your armor break damage output by 20k power, hypothetically speaking. It's for this reason that if I see more than 2 Stunverse, it's usually probably not that good of a list. I genuinely think that this card is not very good right now. You still play the 2 because it does come up and it does matter. Next up is 2 copies of Voltage. This card never came up in the whole event, but it did in testing. Basically, if you have no Counterblast, but your opponent has a fat bind zone for whatever reason, this can be a better Exterminate. It gives your whole front row plus 3k for each card in their bind zone, and if you have Restanders, that can usually just be game. 1 copy of VMAX, this didn't come up in testing or the event, so you can cut this if you want to, but I have an SGR and I'm going to use it. Also, if by some miracle they have no board and 5 damage, this can just end the game. So, it's worth considering. 1 copy of Sabreeze, sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't. It didn't matter in the games, but it did matter in testing. It's flip fodder for Stunverse. Basically, if you're Stunversing twice, these are your 2 flip fodder targets. So use those wisely, and you can cut this for something else if you really want to. Moving on to the G-Guards, 3 copies of Impede. This is the best G-Guard in the entire game right now. Impede kinda has one of the best effects in, I think, the entire clan, especially because it has a retire trigger that triggers your first thunders, but also because if you have multiples, you can just clear a board. I had 3 active against an MFD player, and I took out their entire board minus a smoke gear, but the smoke gear was in the back center rearguard circle, so they couldn't even use the new Steam Maiden Stride in order to do anything crazy, and they had to go into history build. Impede reads that first, your opponent chooses one of their own rearguards and binds it. Then, if they have 2 or more rearguards than you, which Ripple players usually will, they have to retire another one of their rearguards. If you have 2 or even 3 Impede, which is very easy to do with Mighty Bolts and the amount of cards you're drawing, this can literally just skip an opponent's turn, in which case you can either armor break them or sweep command exterminate them on the crackback. The math works so that we're just going to show a G-Guard. If you have 1 G-Guard in your G-Zone, and you have 3 heal triggers in your hand, which actually came up 3 of my games, you do have the math to go 1, flip, 2, flip, and you'll notice that your G zone only has 3 face-up G guards, so you can in fact G guard the last impede to flip the last G guard in order to do triple impede if with 1 G unit face up. So if you have 1 G unit face up and you have 3 heal guards in hand, just shotgun the 3 impedes if you can actually wipe the board that way, since if you only do 2, you'll notice you have 1, I do 1 impede, this happens, another impede, this happens, and when they resolve, you now have 5 face up and you can't G guard anymore. So you might as well get the value out of your impedes while you can and just resolve all 3 at once if you have them. So keep that in mind when you're using your impedes. This can be a turn skip, so prioritizing getting the heal guards as fast as possible is absolutely what I'd be recommending. Next up is 2 copies of Bulwark. This is to deal with MFD. Their bind zone will usually have at least 8 cards in it. So if they attack you, you let the first one go through, and then the second one, you activate an impede, and you can just take out their front row. That actually does matter, because sometimes their front row will have a smoke gear. That determines if they can stride or not on their next turn. Bulwark, as a result, is what I consider to be a very specific matchup-dependent card. It's only good against MFD in this meta, given that their bind zone won't really be that big otherwise, because you're just sweep commanding into exterminate. But it is flip fodder for impede if you need it, so 2 copies is absolutely fine. And for the last G guard, we're playing 2 copies of Counteract Dragon. I actually don't remember his name, I just say this guy. You absolutely need to shotgun this as soon as they start swinging, because if they choose not to bind anything, it's basically a 1-card PG, and if they do bind something, you've taken out attacks that are happening later in the turn. If you use this later and they have 2 rested rear guards, they will just bind the rested rear guards, but there's something really fun you can do with a Ripple player where if they swing with 1 Pursuit Assault, then 2 Pursuit Assaults, you can do this on the 2nd Pursuit Assault in order to bait them into potentially binding their own Pursuit Assault. That happened quite a bit in testing. This card is really good otherwise though. If you play it right, it's a 1-card PG, so playing 2 copies can't harm anybody, but 7 G guards in Narukami is enough math so that you can do 1 G guard and then triple Bulwark. Excuse me, not triple Bulwark, I meant triple impede, I'm sorry. Now to talk about my actual tournament report. So round 1 was against Flagberg Mega Colony. There was a bit of a grade 2 game going on there, and I ended up winning so I went undefeated in Swiss, so I don't need to say anything about winning because all my games I won. But it was funny to learn because I never actually tested against Gridora because I never considered it. It is funny to learn that the restanders in this deck, when your opponent's Vanguard attacks, if you're under Gridora and all of your front row restanders are rested, you can actually activate their effects to restand them after your Vanguard attacks. So Gridora doesn't actually really do much to your deck. It's quite funny. Round 2 was against MFD. I was lucky enough to have 3 impedes in my hand. Like I said, that left him with a smoke gear in the back row center, and they weren't actually able to kill me off. They had to go into History Build, sorry. I don't know my Gear Chronicle cards either. And so I was able to armor break them on the clapback because of that. Round 3 was against Albert Huang from WCC. He actually went into Volios on his first grade 3 and then went into the new Aquaforce Stride and made an Excel Circle. That one Excel Circle is what I believe to be the reason why I was able to sweep command into Exterminate. It gave my front row the extra 10k they needed to beat through his hand and put him to 6 damage. In round 4, I fought against another Ripple player who did not know what Armor Break did, and I did get to resolve Armor Break against him for 14 crit. I did forget to activate the skill, but he did let me take it back, so my guy, if you're listening, thank you so much. You are the reason I top 2'd, because if I lost there, that would have been really unfortunate. In round 5, I fought the Mirror Match, but he wasn't on this variant, he was on the Superior Ride variant. So he had the full combo. He went first, he did Superior Ride, he stun-versed me twice, and he was on Voing. His hand was always only 5 or 6 cards, and so when he had enough front row Excel that I could just go into Armor Break for game, I absolutely went Armor Break for game, and that's the reason I won that one. Round 6 was against Gurguit. I didn't actually Armor Break him because I was really worried that Gurguit would activate his effect and find a PG off the top. I knew that next turn he was probably going to Ultima me because I hadn't seen the Overtrigger yet, so I thought to myself, it's either I kill him now or I kill him later. It went into Sweep Command into Exterminate. I drew a bunch of cards, I believe 5, gave 50k to my front row, and swung with all my dudes, and turns out he did have a PG on the top, so that was the correct play and not the Armor Break in that instance. And my last round was against Deletor Messiah. My opponent was a really nice guy. I had a really good game with him. I talked to him on Twitter earlier today, actually, and we're going to get some remote fights in later sometime, but he's a really chill dude, really cool guy. Thanks for the games, buddy. Absolutely awesome last round. And unfortunately, I'm sorry that your top 8 run didn't go so well, man. You'll get him next time, I promise. In top 8, I ended up fighting the Superior Ride player again. This time, he did not have the Superior Ride, even though he went first. And once again, it was armor break for game. Simple as that. In top 4, I went against Albert Huang once again. And armor break for game. What can I say? And in the finals, it was Jaime Alvarez. Something very interesting happened. So I stun-versed on an armor break after he had seen it and left me at 3 damage. I stun-versed on an armor break, and his hand was too big for me to even armor break, even if I had the 4 damage. He absolutely would have been able to guard it, and that would have been very unfortunate for me. He would have had a lot of cards left over. But I sat on the 12. Took 2 cards of his hand with stun-burst number 1, swung, and passed. My theory was, if I could survive his next turn, which I was very confident with the hand I had, that I would be able to do stun-burst for 4 or 5, and armor break him absolutely then and there. It would have been big enough to do so. Unfortunately, he didn't hit the over-trigger, so sometimes people are just better than us. But ended up going undefeated until the final round of the event. An absolutely fantastic event. That's been my deck profile for Eradicator Armor Break. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this deck for the little bit that you have left. This is a one-time sort of deck. If you guys are interested, I will make another deck tech using Eradicator, but I'll make it so that it's for the post-ban list meta, assuming our ban list is the same as Japan's ban list. I think this deck is still really good after Ripple and MFD exit the meta, but until then, I am Ty Smith, Ty Sensei-sama. It's been an absolute blast. I'm really happy to be your 2nd place champion. I will see you guys later. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me down below what you think of this deck. Tell me if you want to see any other decks in the future, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye!